I gave the HOA 48 hours, pay for the land or I'd dig up their cables. Now there's an excavator in my yard, and the cops just showed up. Let me back up a bit. I'm not one of those guys with a family ranch passed down through the ages or some luxury estate I show off at parties. 15 years ago, I just wanted a place where nobody could tell me what to do. I'd been working in telecom my whole life, running infrastructure projects for the big names you've heard of. After 30 years of that grind, I had a decent chunk saved up. I found this piece of land, a little over an acre on the far side of the Ridgeview development, technically outside their HOA boundaries. Perfect. Secluded enough to give me peace, close enough to town when I needed it. No board votes, no nosy neighbors counting how many times I mow the lawn. I bought it outright, built a simple house, and finally started living life on my own terms. Here's where it gets interesting. When Ridgeview was first being built, their plans hit a snag. The original utility easements didn't cover enough ground to run high-speed fiber and new electrical service to the eastern section of the development. They needed a route, and guess where the easiest path happened to run? Right along the edge of my property. Now, I wasn't about to just roll over and give it away, but back then, the board was reasonable. We sat down, hashed out an agreement. They'd get a 5-meter strip along my east fence line, underground only, and they'd pay me a fair annual fee to lease the right to run their cables and sewer main. It was all legal, signed, notarized, filed with the county, a proper contract with clear boundaries and terms. For over a decade, it worked fine. Once a year, I'd get a check, they'd send someone to walk the line and make sure everything was good, and we all went on with our lives. I didn't care what HOA nonsense they had going on over there. Wasn't my circus, wasn't my monkeys. Then last year, Cheryl Brandt showed up. I knew her type the second I met her. Smart suit, sharper smile, full of buzzwords about modernizing community infrastructure and maximizing shared resources. Didn't take her long to start making waves. One day I get a notice, annual lease payment suspended pending review of community infrastructure status. I call her up. She tells me straight, we've determined the utility lines on your property now serve a public function and are to be considered community assets. No further compensation is necessary. Like hell they weren't. I dug out the contract, still ironclad, still valid, fired off a formal demand letter through my lawyer, and that's when the gloves came off. They stopped responding. A month later, I hear from a buddy in the city records office. HOA had filed a petition to have my leased land segment reclassified as a public easement, with no compensation, no negotiation. Just poof, now it belongs to everybody. Translation? They wanted to take my land and run their shiny new unified infrastructure project right through it, free of charge. And once they locked that down, guess what? Metro Development, the big shot builder backing Cheryl, could run even more lines for the next wave of houses they planned to slap up just beyond Ridgeview. I wasn't about to let that happen. That's when I drafted my notice, 48 hours to restore lease payments and withdraw your petition. Otherwise, I start digging. And here we are. And wouldn't you know it, the first violation came faster than I thought. About a week after I sent that 48-hour notice, I caught movement on my eastern fence line, right where the fiber trunk runs under the property, middle of the damn afternoon. I grabbed my phone and walked out there, and sure enough, there they were. 3 guys in orange vests with Metro Development logos on the back, hard hats, clipboards, tools, and one of them had already unlatched my gate like he owned the place. They were halfway through setting up some kind of temporary work tent, folding tables, extension cords, the whole deal. Looked like they were planning to camp out and run line tests or maybe start trenching. I stepped right up. Hey, who gave you permission to be here? The lead guy, maybe mid-30s, turns around like he'd just been inconvenienced at Starbucks. We're authorized by the Ridgeview HOA to perform scheduled maintenance on community infrastructure. Community infrastructure. I almost laughed. This is private property. You don't have authorization from me, and your so-called easement isn't public. I pointed at the ground. You're trespassing. Now here's the part that really burned me. The guy just smirked. We were told this is now a public utility corridor. He actually said it like that, with a straight face. We have the right to access and maintain it. If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA board. Take it up with the people trying to steal my land? Right. I told them point blank, you've got 2 minutes to pack up and leave. Next time you set foot here, it'll be with a sheriff's escort. And even then, I'll have legal action ready. They didn't budge at first, looked at each other, probably texting Cheryl to see what to do next. So I started recording. Full video, panned the tent, the tools, their faces, the unlocked gate, everything. That got their attention. I watched them scramble to take the tent down and haul their gear back to the trucks. Whole time, they kept muttering about public access and this won't hold up. As they drove off, one of them, the same smirking guy, leaned out the window and called back, "You can't stop progress, man. This is happening whether you like it or not." And that's when it really clicked for me. This wasn't just Cheryl being drunk on HOA power. This was Metro Development pushing from behind the scenes. They wanted that corridor locked in as public so they could run more lines, build out their new sector, and do it all without paying a cent for the right to use my land. That wasn't going to happen. So I called my lawyer, then I called my buddy in records again, and then I called a few friends who know exactly what to do when someone tries to bury you in legal BS. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one. I thought maybe, once I'd made it clear they couldn't just walk onto my land, they'd back off. Yeah, right. That's when they kicked it into high gear. First came the flyers. One morning I step outside and there's a bright orange paper zip-tied to my mailbox. Community alert. Landowner threatens to disable critical infrastructure serving Ridgeview families. Emergency response times may be impacted. Please contact your HOA board to voice your concern. I stood there on my driveway reading it while a couple of neighbors walked by and gave me dirty looks. Then I checked the HOA's Facebook group, which I'm not even supposed to be part of, but I've got eyes everywhere. Cheryl had posted this long, sanctimonious post about certain individuals attempting to sabotage essential community services out of personal greed. Comments were flooding in. People freaking out. How could someone be so selfish? What if my kid's emergency call doesn't go through? He should be arrested. It was surreal. I've lived here 15 years. I keep to myself. Never once had an issue with a neighbor. And now suddenly I'm public enemy number one because I expect people to honor a contract? But it didn't stop there. The next day I got a call from a buddy who works in town hall. He was giving me a heads up. The HOA had formally submitted a petition to classify my leased strip as a designated public utility easement. They were trying to retroactively reclassify it so they could argue I had no right to restrict access or demand payment. Here's the kicker. Attached to the petition was a scanned agreement, supposedly signed years ago, granting permanent public access to the strip. And that document? I'd never seen it in my life. It was a complete forgery. The signature at the bottom was from the old HOA president, a guy named Martin Cooper, who'd moved to Florida 5 years ago. Martin was the one who'd signed my original lease contract. I still had that document in my files. I knew exactly what his real signature looked like. And this wasn't it. So now they weren't just trying to gaslight the neighborhood, they were outright forging documents to steal my land. At that point, I wasn't angry anymore. I was cold. I sent a formal cease and desist to Cheryl and the entire HOA board, copied the city council, copied Metro Development's legal department. Then I fired off a letter to the county recorder's office, flagging the petition as fraudulent and demanding an investigation. I figured that would at least buy some time. But instead, the next morning, 2 squad cars rolled up to my gate. No sirens, but lights flashing. Out stepped 2 officers, and guess what they've got? An official warning, saying I'm not authorized to interfere with designated community infrastructure and that law enforcement will respond to any acts of vandalism. Vandalism, on my own land. I stayed calm, invited them onto the porch, sat them down, handed them a copy of the original lease agreement, a notarized copy of my property title, and a copy of the fraudulent document they'd just been sent. One of them looked real uncomfortable. The other just said, "We're not here to take sides, sir. We're just following up on a complaint." I told them straight, "You can tell whoever sent you that I have no intention of damaging anything, but I will enforce my property rights, and if I have to start digging to protect them, I will." Then I handed them coffee and politely showed them the gate. And as they drove off, I realized something real simple. I was in this alone. The HOA had the neighborhood riled up. They had Metro Development and its lawyers. They had the cops playing messenger boys. If I didn't shut this down fast, the next step wasn't going to be a warning. It was going to be a bulldozer. At that point, I'll admit, part of me wanted to start digging right then and there. But I'm not stupid. I've worked in telecom, I've sat through enough court depositions to know one thing. If you want to win, you better be the most reasonable person in the room. So I gave them one more chance. First, I had my lawyer send an official demand letter to Cheryl and the entire HOA board. It laid everything out crystal clear. The original lease is valid and binding. The public easement document is a forgery. The HOA is in breach of contract and trespassing on private property. If they do not restore payments and withdraw the fraudulent petition within 48 hours, I will take legal action and begin excavation work to secure my property rights. I copied the city council, the county recorder's office, and Metro Development's legal team, just so no one could claim ignorance later. Second, I called Martin Cooper, tracked him down in Florida through an old mutual friend. When I told him what was happening, he damn near exploded over the phone. I never signed any transfer of easement, he said, and I'd be happy to say so under oath. I had him write a sworn affidavit that same day. My lawyer filed it with the county first thing next morning, but that wasn't enough, because the HOA wasn't backing down. The next afternoon, I get an email from Cheryl herself. Real slick wording, corporate legalese all the way through. We maintain that the utility corridor serves essential community functions, and any obstruction or interference will be viewed as an actionable offense under civil and possibly criminal law. Translation: go ahead and dig, and we'll have you arrested. That's when I decided to talk to her face to face. I showed up at the HOA office the next morning. Simple brick building next to the community center, the kind of place where they hand out pool passes and argue about fence heights. Walked right in. Cheryl was sitting at her desk, all polished up in a blue blazer, looking like she was about to run for Congress. "Mr. Mercer," she said, all fake sweet, "if you're here to discuss the situation, I do hope you've come with a more reasonable attitude." I sat down across from her, pulled out the lease agreement, my property title, and Martin's affidavit, laid them out in front of her one by one. "These documents are real," I said. "Yours are not. You've got 48 hours to fix this, or I'll fix it myself." She didn't even blink. "Mr. Mercer, you may not be aware, but community sentiment is strongly against you right now. The board has broad support. You'd be wise to consider how your actions will be viewed." I smiled. "Sentiment doesn't override the law, Cheryl. You might want to think about how your actions will look when this hits court." And that's when I saw it, just for a second. The mask slipped. There was a flicker of panic in her eyes, but then she doubled down. "We are prepared to defend our position. Do what you feel you must." I stood up, gathered my papers, looked her straight in the eye. "You'll get one last letter from me. After that, the next thing you'll see is a backhoe." I walked out, and as I was getting into my truck, my phone buzzed. Text from my buddy in records: "Heads up, Metro Development just filed another set of documents tied to your property. Looks like they're trying to rush something through." I stared at the screen. So this wasn't just about HOA power anymore. This was a full-blown land grab. And now? Now it was war. I thought I was already staring at the worst of it. But I hadn't seen anything yet. That same afternoon, after walking out of Cheryl's office, I went straight home and started digging. Figuratively for now. I called up my buddy in records, the one who tipped me off about the HOA petition. "What exactly did they just file?" I asked. He sighed. "It's a supplemental infrastructure plan. Metro Development filed it under the city's fast-track review program. You need to see this yourself." So I drove down there, walked into records, and he slid a manila folder across the counter. "Unofficial copy. You didn't get it from me." Inside was a full site map and project plan, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Right there, in black and white, a proposed Metro fiber hub, new electrical substation access, expanded sewer main, and a future community greenway trail system, all running straight through the 5-meter strip on my property. But that wasn't even the worst part. Attached to the plan was a title report, and according to that report, my eastern strip was already classified as a public utility easement, meaning, on paper, they'd already moved it out of my ownership. I flipped through the pages, heart pounding, and there it was, a transfer of easement document, dated 6 months ago, signed by Martin Cooper. Only one problem. 6 months ago, Martin was recovering from major surgery in Florida. I knew this because I'd spoken to him 2 days earlier. There was no chance in hell he'd flown back here to sign anything. And then I saw the kicker. The witness on the document was none other than Metro Development's corporate counsel. It was a full-blown forgery, and now Metro was using it to push through millions of dollars in new infrastructure right through my land. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't about HOA dues. It wasn't about one strip of land. They were setting up to take the whole corridor, lock it in legally, and once the project was in place, there'd be no undoing it. I sat there in that records office staring at those pages, and for the first time in this whole mess, I actually felt sick. Because this wasn't just Cheryl being power hungry, this was a coordinated move. Metro, the HOA board, maybe even people inside City Hall, all playing the same game. And if I didn't stop it right now, they were going to erase my rights out from under me. So I took a deep breath, thanked my friend, and walked out with that unofficial copy tucked under my arm. Next call, my lawyer. How fast can we file an injunction? That depends, he said. How bad is it? It's bad, I told him. It's damn near criminal. And in the pit of my gut, I knew this fight just went federal. I drove home that night with one thing on my mind. They think they already won. That was their mistake. The second I walked in the door, I called my lawyer, Greg. You sitting down? I asked. This better not be another HOA fine, he joked. Worse, they forged a goddamn transfer of easement and Metro is already filing city permits based on it. Dead silence for a second. Send me everything, right now. I scanned every page from that unofficial file and dumped it in his inbox. 10 minutes later, he called back, his voice a lot less casual. Okay, here's what we do. First, we file an emergency injunction with the county court. That'll freeze any city approval until the document's legitimacy is reviewed. Second, we file a formal fraud complaint with the district attorney's office. And third, I asked, we make damn sure the public knows exactly what's going on. That was the part I already had covered. See, I'm not just some hermit in the woods. Working telecom all those years, I've got connections, including a friend, Laura James, who happens to run the local newspaper's investigative desk. I called her. Laura, how do you feel about a story on corporate land grabs, HOA corruption, and document forgery? I feel like I should grab my recorder, spill. Told her the whole thing, sent her copies of everything. Her response? I'll have a piece up by morning. You need to be ready to go public. I'm way ahead of you, I said. Next, I called Martin Cooper down in Florida. Martin, they're using a forged document with your name on it. Those sons of bitches, he said. You tell your lawyer I'll testify, in person if I have to. And just like that, the pieces started falling into place. By the time the sun came up, we had an emergency injunction request filed with the county, a fraud complaint filed with the DA, Martin's sworn affidavit notarized and ready, a front-page story scheduled to hit the local news site by noon. But that wasn't enough. I wanted Metro and Cheryl to feel it. So I called a local contractor, a guy named Roy, runs a small excavation business. Told him the situation, asked if he could have a backhoe and crew ready on standby, not to dig yet, just to show up. You planning to make a point? He asked. You could say that, I said. Be here tomorrow morning. Cameras will be too. Then I called Laura back and gave her one more detail. Tell your photographer to be here at 9 a.m. sharp. We're going to give them one hell of a front-page photo. I barely slept that night. But when I did close my eyes, all I saw was Cheryl's face when she realized this wasn't some stubborn old guy she could roll over. It was a fight now, and I wasn't backing down. By the next morning, my yard looked like the staging ground for a construction project, and that was exactly the point. At 8:30 sharp, Roy showed up with his crew, backhoe on a flatbed, cones, safety tape, the whole 9 yards. We digging or we waiting? Roy asked. Waiting, I said. For now, we're making sure everyone knows we're ready. By 8:45, Laura's photographer arrived. Big camera, press vest, already snapping shots before he even got out of the car. At 8:55, 3 more cars pulled up, reporters from the local paper and one from the regional news station. And at exactly 9 a.m., I rolled out a folding table, set it right at the edge of the disputed strip, and laid out 3 things on it. A copy of the original lease agreement, a copy of my property deed, a big bold sign that read, Private property, no public easement exists here. Fraudulent documents filed, legal action in progress. Then I stood there, arms crossed in front of the cameras with Roy's backhoe parked behind me like a goddamn tank. That's when the neighbors started coming out. At first, I saw the usual suspects, a few of Cheryl's cronies, arms folded, whispering among themselves. Then some of the quieter folks started drifting over. People I hadn't seen say a word since this all began. They stood by the curb, reading the sign, snapping photos with their phones. And just as the first reporter was starting her on-camera intro, guess who rolled up? Yep, 2 squad cars, lights flashing. I could almost hear Cheryl cackling from her HOA office. The officers got out, walked up, one of them holding another official warning. Mr. Mercer, we've received reports that you're preparing to interfere with essential infrastructure. We need to advise you that any such action may result in legal consequences. I nodded, smiled for the cameras. Gentlemen, I said loud enough for every mic and boom pole in the area to catch it. As you can see, I have not begun any work. I am standing on my private property, enforcing my legal rights. These documents prove that no public easement exists here, and that the claim otherwise is based on a forged document now under investigation by the DA's office. Then I handed them a folder with copies of everything: lease, deed, affidavit, injunction filing. The younger officer flipped through it, eyebrows climbing higher with each page. The older one finally sighed. Understood. We'll log this as an informational contact. No further action at this time. And just like that, they turned around and left. The cameras caught every second. By noon, the news piece was up online. Headline in bold: Local landowner fights back against HOA, claims fraud in infrastructure dispute. And the photo? Me standing in front of the table, sign in place, backhoe looming behind me, cops walking away empty-handed. That was the moment things started to shift. By evening, my inbox was flooded. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years were sending messages of support. People were furious they'd been lied to. And then, the real kicker, one of the HOA board members emailed me anonymously. Cheryl's been pushing this deal hard. Metro's already got contractors lined up for the new development. She promised them this was a done deal. Now they're panicking. Good, let them panic. Because the next morning, we were going to court. The next day felt like walking into a live grenade with the pin halfway out. By 9 a.m., Greg and I were already downtown, walking into the county courthouse. The emergency injunction hearing was scheduled for 10, but the hallway outside the courtroom was already packed. Reporters, neighbors, even a few Metro suits hanging back trying to look casual. And Cheryl, front and center in a red power suit, flanked by her lawyer and 2 of the HOA board members. She looked like a cat who'd swallowed a whole flock of canaries. When she spotted me, she gave this little smirk and leaned over to her lawyer. Big mistake. The hearing itself was fast, way faster than I expected. Greg laid it out in brutal detail: the original lease agreement, my property deed, the fraudulent transfer of easement document, Martin's affidavit swearing he'd never signed it. The city records showing the forged document had been used to fast-track Metro's infrastructure plan. Then the DA's office rep stood up and dropped the hammer. Your Honor, based on preliminary review, this document constitutes potential felony forgery and fraud. We are requesting immediate suspension of all related development activities pending full criminal investigation. That's when Cheryl's smile finally cracked. Her lawyer scrambled, objecting, stalling, claiming they acted in good faith based on existing documentation. But the judge wasn't having it. Injunction granted, he said. All infrastructure work is to cease immediately. Furthermore, the court will coordinate with law enforcement to secure all original documents and digital records related to this matter. And just like that, game over. But the real show started out in the hallway. The second we stepped out, the DA's investigator was waiting, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. They walked straight up to Cheryl, badge out. Mrs. Brandt, you are being detained for questioning in connection with a felony fraud investigation. Please come with us. And in front of a wall of cameras, reporters, and about 20 stunned neighbors, they cuffed her, right there in the courthouse hallway. Her lawyer shouted about misunderstandings and procedural overreach, but nobody was listening. I stood there, watching her get walked out in cuffs, and couldn't help thinking, you should have paid the damn lease. By that afternoon, it was all over the news. HOA president arrested in land grab scandal. Metro development under scrutiny after fraud allegations. And the HOA board? They went radio silent. I had neighbors knocking on my door, some apologizing, some just wanting to shake my hand. People who'd been glaring at me 2 days ago were now thanking me for standing up. I just told them the truth. I didn't do this to be a hero. I did it because if you let them take 1 inch, they'll take the whole damn yard.